But Michael is one of our presenters for today this morning, but also the CEO that's created Jobs Connected. So if you ever are interested in learning and connecting with Michael, please do so because he is going to share all the innovative ways in this virtual world, whether we're going hybrid, whether we're going live again, on how you connect and how you can do things on a virtual platform, how you can organize different things. And I don't want to spoil it. I really don't. So without any further ado, can we give Michael a huge round of applause and welcome him to CPA as our first speaker?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to present and everything. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. All right. So yes, so my name is Michael Olbaum. I am the founder and CEO of Jobs Connected, a company that hosts virtual events. I'm sure that a lot of you have been looking into and possibly even executing virtual events. I mean, look at everyone here right now. We are in a virtual event as we speak due to everything going on with COVID. And I'm excited to share with you today some of the trends and best practices that we have seen over the past year for virtual job fairs specifically, so that you can make your virtual job fairs as successful as possible, especially now that virtual job fairs have become increasingly important. So if you've never hosted a virtual job fair before, hopefully this will help you get started. And if you have hosted one before, hopefully this will help you host even better events. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, see if this works okay. Can you see my screen all right? All right, perfect.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and get to the next slide. Okay, so the first decision that you are going to make is how you want to host the event. So there are a few different options here. You can choose a platform or a vendor to host this for you, but you can also do this yourself. So if you are hosting a larger event, you have the budget, you want additional features, support assistance, you might want to go with a platform or vendor. But at the same time, if you're hosting a smaller event, maybe 2 to 3 employers or departments, depending what your organization's like, you definitely can do this yourself, especially if you maybe don't have the budget. Not a problem at all. So if you are going to do this yourself, there's a couple recommendations I have for you. I really recommend having some sort of video chat component. So sort of like today, we're using Zoom. There are a lot of different options. You can use whatever you think is a good fit for you. You can use Google Hangouts, you can use Teams, really any different kind of video conferencing or webinar solution works well. And basically you can do it in a similar format even to how this event's hosted, where you have one or more meetings, you can send out the link, and that can change depending on how you're hosting the event. But it really gives it a much more interactive feel when you're hosting it yourself. So one thing to keep in mind though is that I think there are a couple of these platforms that we all have come to really been using in the past year or so, but they all have different features. So, if you're browsing around and trying to figure out which one might be a good fit for you, if you're hosting it yourself, just keep that in mind. For instance, Zoom does provide you with a list of who ended up attending your session. Meanwhile, something like Google Hangouts doesn't. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at the different options. And the other thing I really want to point out is that I recommend having some sort of registration. So collecting registrations is super, super important. And I think that's something that might be seen as that, just a little extra. And I'll go into a little bit more detail later as to why that's the case. But basically, for now, I would just say that having some sort of way to collect registrations is important. You know, some of these different platforms have an ability, like Zoom and whatnot, have ways to do that built in. You can also use something like Eventbrite, like for this event. And if you're a college or university, your job posting CMS might be able to do that for you as well. So I think a decent number of California schools use Job Speaker, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. And they might have a feature that would allow you to collect registrations for events. All right. So the next thing is choosing a date and time. So this is something that, you may or may not think that people actually get kind of antsy about, and they kind of get nervous and are not sure the best way to do it. So for the most part, I would say don't overthink it. It's pretty similar to an in-person event. If you host in-person events already and you have a date and time that works for you, stick with that. If you don't have a date and time that works for you, or you want to take advantage of being able to choose a date and time that you normally wouldn't be able to in a virtual environment, there are a few things to keep in mind. So let's start with the date. So for the date, there's a couple of different things, but if you're inviting students rather than traditional job seekers, students are, most likely to attend when they aren't swamped with work. And that might sound, maybe obvious when you say it out loud, but if you are not a college or university and you're thinking about putting together an event, it might not be something that's, in the forefront of your mind. So avoiding, choosing a date during finals or, busy school periods is important. Some colleges and universities will even host events when students are on break. And that can go either way, as students have free time, but they might be a little less motivated to attend. So just, I would say, keep that in mind, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way or not the best way to do it. In terms of day of the week, I think this is something that gets asked pretty frequently. I would say that when you look at the data, it doesn't seem like there's a day of the week that consistently performs the best across the board. So I wouldn't really overthink that too. I don't think it's too crucial. But if you really press me to say which days are the best, I would say that some organizations do better with like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, but there isn't a super strong correlation, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you're inviting traditional job seekers to your event, um, the weekends can work really well because they don't have to work if they're employed, and they'll just have more free time. And I point out more so traditional job seekers because in most cases, colleges and universities don't have the ability to host on the weekend. But if you ever do, it might be something to look into as well. All right, so let's talk about the time. So a time frame of 2 to 4 hours tends to work the best. So if you do less than that, it usually isn't enough time unless it's a smaller event. Maybe if it's a webinar with 1 to 2 employers or departments, that might be more than enough time then. But if you're doing something with more than that, let's say I would say even 10 employers or departments or more, 2 to 4 hours is probably the way to go. And even if you have a ton of employers or departments attending, something like 60, 80, 100, 4 hours is still usually more than enough. So we usually see that around the fourth hour or so, the job seekers tend to fade off. So one trend that we have noticed, and I think this is pretty important, is that job seekers seem to log in terms of their peak around 12 to 2 p.m. So whatever time frame you choose with your 2 to 4 hour time frame, I would really recommend including that time frame. So something like maybe 11 to 3, maybe 12 to 4, something like that. One exception would be if you're able to host something maybe in the evening when students and traditional job seekers are, maybe out of class or work, something like 3 to 7. You might be able to get some folks that would be busy normally, and that might work well. All right, so let's move on to registration timeline. So this is also something I think that when people try doing this, they aren't really sure what a registration timeline should look like. So I would say for both job seekers and employers, you will get more registrations if you have more time to send invites. It's pretty straightforward like that. Especially if it's your first time hosting a virtual event, I would recommend at least 4 to 6 weeks. And I think it's really tempting for anyone, but maybe even more so for employers if they're hosting an event, to really try to rush things because they have deadlines and they really need to fill positions. But if you sort of rush things, you might not get the turnout you're looking for. And since you're putting some effort into this, you really want to make sure that you're getting the ROI you're looking for. So I would say at least for your first one, at least 4 to 6 weeks. But and 4 to 6 weeks is really nice because it gives you time to adjust your marketing if it's not working. So maybe you do your first email blast or something, and you only get a few job seekers here and there, you can try a different approach, and you have time to figure it out. But if you only gave yourself a week and a half to do it, then that's sort of what you're stuck with. So, and I would say this is the case for both job seekers and employers, you know. So, for job seekers, while advertising the event in advance tends to lead to more registrations, it doesn't necessarily correlate with more attendance. So, I think that's pretty important. For a certain university with a student population of about like 60,000 or so, for one of their events, I think this is pretty interesting. They advertised it to their students about 3 weeks in advance, and they got about like 2,800 registrations, and about 1,150 students attended. So if you look at it percentage wise, it's like 41% attendance. For another event, they tried shortening the registration period to 4 days. So the students only had 4 days, very narrow to register. And they had about 2,350 registrations. So we're looking like 500 registrations less. But they still had 1,120 students attend. So actually, percentage wise, the attendance was higher. It was like 47%. So by giving students less time to register, they ended up having a higher percentage of students attending, 6% higher, but had a little bit more attendance when they actually had registration start earlier. So there's some takeaways here that I really want to point out. So registration is helpful because you can gauge interest in the event. And that's why if you're, especially if you're doing this yourself, you really want to have some even, simple way to gauge how that's going for you. And that may not be possible at an in-person event. Which is sort of a perk of the virtual, but it does not indicate how turnout will be. So many organizations are surprised that at the very least for like their first event, that it's fairly common to have like 25 to 40% of job seekers attend. So this does depend on a variety of factors though. So if you're getting something like 75% turnout, that's very good, and that's great. So the first time you host a virtual event will probably be the lowest turnout. And I want to point that out so that if you don't get the turnout you're looking for your first one, not to be discouraged. So like, let's take a school that has about a student population of about 6,000 students. They regularly get about, 100 or so students now, and about 40 employers at their events. But for their first event, it wasn't like that. They had maybe like 20 students, 17 employers for their first virtual event. The school with the 60,000 student population, usually, brings in 1,200 students or so in attendance now. But their first event was like half, it was like 600. So even though 600 might be good for a bigger school, they might be looking for more. So, I just want to emphasize, for your first event, not to get discouraged if you don't get the turnout you're looking for. So starting registrations earlier tends to lead to more registrations. But in order to capitalize on this, you need to have a lot of reminders as you get closer to the event so that they remember to attend. The more ways you can reach out to them, the better. Some organizations send out text messages in addition to email, which is great if you have the capacity to do that. So the more ways you can remind them, much better. It can also be helpful to notify job seekers of employers or departments that might be a good fit. So this not only serves as a reminder of the event, but it also makes it clear to the job seekers that there's something for them. So even if it's just like a simple generalized something that you send out, like a list of employers and maybe some of the positions that they're looking for, it can make a big difference. And some colleges and other institutions do get better attendance when they do this. I'm going to cover this a little bit more later as well. So on the employer recruiter sort of side of things, I would say it's pretty much the same with them. They do need reminders to attend, and don't be fooled that they might be more responsible or something. They do forget, they get busy, they have things going on. But I think that more so than attending is the instruction. So one of the things that you might be surprised about is how often recruiters, for any type of organization, they don't necessarily remember how to attend, even if you send them tutorials and instructions. And that's really important depending on the complexity of the type of event you're hosting. So, even if you're, hosting it yourself, you might get questions like, are we using Teams or Zoom for this event? Or if you're using a platform, how do I make my booth again? You might get these more than you'd expect. So these kinds of questions come up all the time. So the more you can remind them, the better. So you really want your recruiters to be prepared and ready, I would say, really by a week in advance. So they are not scrambling to figure this out last minute. You really don't want to deal with during your event. You've got a lot of things going on then, struggling to help recruiters figure out how to do things. So, the less people that are in that position, the better. And, this is also why you really don't want to have anyone register like last minute. And I think it's really tempting, especially if you're like a smaller institution or a college and you want to get as many registrations as possible. And we'll talk, of course, that can be really helpful. But it really does, those ones that register late are the ones that have the highest chance of being unprepared. Um, and they'll give you a harder time. So really having like a strict deadline and cutoff for being prepared and registration is really important. All right, so let's talk about who to invite. So I think this is something that um, might be a little bit more straightforward if you're an employer that's hosting an event. And it could be even as well if you're a college or university and you have your standard employers that you would be inviting to events. But I think it's also something that many organizations aren't really focusing on as much recently because, recently with COVID and everything got turned upside down. I think a lot of organizations were figuring things out and just trying to, get something together and get by. But this is something I want to bring everyone's attention to because it can have a big impact on the turnout for the event, which is ultimately what you're hoping for, right? So it's not just the quantity of the employers and departments, but also the variety. So the most common feedback that we get from job seekers as to why they didn't attend is there wasn't anything for me. So by structuring your fairs so that they better serve your population, you can cut down on the number of job seekers that say there's nothing for them. So within all majors industries type of fair, this could relate to either a standard like employer or college university. You'll probably see higher registration rates. But at the same time, you'll probably see a little bit less turnout, at least percentage wise. So with like a major or industry specific fair, like a business majors fair, or maybe if you're an employer like an IT specific fair, you'll probably see less registrations because it's more niche. It's a little bit more of a narrow audience, but you'll see a higher percentage of registered students or job seekers attend. So let's see if we take a look here. We've got like this case study here. And one of the things I'm actually really excited to show you today is some of the different data and results that we've been seeing. So hopefully this would be sort of cool for you to get an idea of what other people are doing and how things are working out for them. So let's look at a school that's actually hosted both. In one case, they have an all majors fair, and they also have a major specific fair. So the majors fair was pretty big, as you can see. There's like 97 employers. They've got like almost 3,000 student registrations. They have like 1,152 students attending, like 41% ended up attending or so. And they had another fair as well that was major specific that was 21 employers, 114 student registrations with like 91 students attending. So like 80 or so percent pretty much for attendance. And, I think if you look at it, at least in terms of some of the numbers, it can seem really impressive to have like that 97 employers. And, of course, there's a greater chance that for an all majors or industries fair that the students that registered, there's a lot of choices for them, but they might have actually more difficulty finding something that's a good fit for them specifically. So, if we look at other sort of events across, that other institutions are hosting, we kind of see this trend across the board. So I want everyone to keep in mind here, there are a lot of variables at these events, maybe the time they're hosting, the time or date that they're hosting it, the industry and things like that, the size of the institution. But there's like certain trends that we can see here. So, let's take a look here at these all majors events, you can see that, there's a little bit of a trend where as there's more employer registrations, there's a little bit better percentage of job seekers attending, but at the same time, it's not exactly that clear cut, right? Because we've got, this one here with 8%, this one with 13%. Something else that's sort of interesting, I just wanted to sort of be able to provide to everyone is that some of these events were specifically for students and some of them were more towards job seekers. So, in case you are targeting one population or the other, you can see how it might relate to you. Um, but if we look at these major industry specific events, we can kind of see like across the board that the percentage of job seekers that attended is kind of better. It's higher here. So, we don't have quite those same numbers here. We've got like this one event here that had quite a few registrations. We see a little bit higher the total job seeker registrations here. But, overall, a lot more of those job seekers that registered ended up attending. So it's something that, you might not really be thinking about and focused on, but it can be really helpful. So overall, here's my recommendation. And I would say that if you're able to host multiple major specific events, to do it. I think that overall you'll probably see better turnout. And it doesn't have to be very narrow. You can have an event that's like, it doesn't have to be like accounting only. It could be broader, like business, something like that. And I think that's one of the strengths of online events. It can be easier to reach more departments or employers that are out of your, local area. So you might be able to put something like that together. But at the same time, I don't want you to feel like you have to do something that's specific like this. It is a reality that for, many organizations, it's not really that easy to put together a bunch of small events and something like that. So if you're not able to, it's totally fine to do an all majors event. You can have a lot of success with them, and there's a lot of, there are advantages to doing them as well. And my advice to you would just be to get as many employers or departments to attend as possible, and just try to have as much variety as possible. So, all right. So now let's talk about how to advertise the event. All right. So if you're advertising the event to employers, or I guess recruiters, especially if you're, an employer that's doing this, you probably already have connections with employers, and the key is just to notify them. So a simple invitation through your job posting CMS, if you're a college or university, job speaker, handshake, things like that, or through email is usually enough. So if you aren't getting enough employer registrations, there are a few things you can try. You can try to personally reach out and call the employer, or reach out to them on LinkedIn. There are some, college career centers that have, done this to great effect, especially for like a smaller event, like a showcase or, major industry specific event. And you can also, if you don't have any connections, maybe you are some sort of like networking organization, you can post the event on Eventbrite and whatnot, and try to do outreach as well. So let's talk about for job seekers. So for students, it's a little different. And, however you usually notify students about the event will work just fine. So, again, job posting CMS, emails, but there are a few methods I want to highlight because I think they are surprisingly effective, and they may not, be on the forefront of your mind. So let's talk about your organization's course management system if you're a college. So, and also visiting classes to tell students about the event. We have seen some smaller schools get significantly more registrations using these methods. So there was, that college with the 6,000 students, their first event only had about 90 or so student registrations, but they got up to like 200 student registrations for their second event, like basically doubling. And that's because they were able to post the event on their course management system, Blackboard. So, Blackboard, D2L, any of those types of things. So visiting classes is also a bit of work, and some professors won't let you do it. Although maybe you might have a slight edge if you're an employer trying to advertise your event, but it can help a lot. And it's something that both career centers and employers can do. So traditional job seekers. So, it's similar. You won't have certain options, of course, like the course management system, it won't be available. You can still post on social media. You can still use sites like Eventbrite. job posting sites. And, you know, one thing I want to say is to try everything available, because even options like the newspaper and radio can be surprisingly effective in certain cases. So there were actually certain school districts that hosted events, and they benefited a lot from advertising in the local newspaper. So it's something that you might not expect, but for their given target population, it worked really well. So one organization that connects job seekers and employers, they were really struggling with their job seeker registration. They only had about like 200 registrations, which for them was not what they were looking for. They were looking for something much higher. So when they actually did an ad on the radio, they got their registrations up to 700. So it shot up quite significantly. And it was just because of that one radio ad. So you never know what's going to work for you. So it's really important to try a lot of different things until you find something that's really working for you. All right. So the next thing is hosting institution support. So this one might be a little bit unexpected, but when the hosting institution offers support for its attendees, it can make a huge difference. So especially for colleges and universities, I would say. And I think that many hosting institutions aren't aware that they can do this. And it's not something that the hosting institution like has to go overboard and over the top to do. So for going over instructions, webinars can work really well. For whatever reason, webinars seem to be very effective at making employers feel more confident and prepared than like tutorials alone. So even if you have tutorials, videos, etc., they may not view them. So it's really surprising. But what we've seen actually is that when you cover the same content in like a tutorial in a webinar, that a greater number of recruiters will retain the information um, than just the tutorial alone. So, I'm not sure if this is because they're being forced to listen and engage in the webinar, but, or maybe the opportunity to ask questions helps, but it seems to make a big difference. So in terms of what to cover for, the webinar or your training session, you can cover instructions, format, what to expect, maybe make sure to log in on time. We are using Teams or we're using Zoom or, whatever key information you have for them. And if you are even just like a little familiar with the technology that you're using, it can be really helpful. So, one university had a webinar teaching their employers how to use the breakout rooms for Zoom, and that helped their employers a lot. So they were way more prepared than most. And it's not like they were like Zoom experts or anything. Um, but so you don't have to be either, especially on the technology. But if you can go over anything with your recruiters, it can make a really big difference. So something else to mention are office hours. So office hours are really helpful. The same university that did the Zoom breakout room webinar also had employer office hours. And basically employers could virtually drop in and ask any questions, which is sort of a cool thing. And I would say, look, the reality is that even though, you could probably answer a lot of questions pretty easily through email, it really seemed like the employers jumped at the opportunity to do the office hours. And, given the chance, the overall feedback was that the employers felt much more confident and they felt much better prepared than without them. So, you know, it's not something that you have to do, especially if you're a smaller organization. You don't have, the staff, the bandwidth to sort of provide that. But if you can, you might see some nice benefits from it. So the job seekers are a little different. What we find overall is that they tend to be, a lot more confident with the technology part. So you may not have to focus quite as much with that. And that does vary from population to population. But having the office hours and webinars can still be really helpful for two reasons. So, one, it can serve as a reminder for the event and increase chances of job seekers attending, which you may not think of it that way. So I think that alone is pretty helpful. But two, it can help prepare them for the event. Um, if the webinar is about like what to say during the event and what to speak, what to say with employers or recruiters, how to prepare a cover letter, et cetera. So that's a little bit more geared to like colleges, universities, that sort of thing. but it can be really helpful. All right. So role during the event. So since you're the one hosting the event, you've done the invites, everything, what on earth are you supposed to do during the event, right? So I think that's something that people don't necessarily feel certain about. So it's something I thought would be good to cover. So, it's finally the big day. So what do you do? So I would say it really comes down to preference. But that being said, even though it's okay to be kind of inactive, hands off, I think that if you can be a little bit more active, hands on, it can be really helpful. So, overall, doing things like visiting recruiters and whatnot, those employers or recruiters that were visited tend to have overall more positive feedback for a variety of reasons. They feel more supported and got the help they needed, or just like the fact you checked in on them. So it can be really helpful. So, so if you're not sure in terms of, when to visit them, one of the concerns can be is that employers or recruiters might be speaking to job seekers. You can really decrease the chances that you're going to catch them at a bad time, that they're going to be speaking to someone if you check in with them at the beginning or the end of the event. So those are really good times. If you have a big team, it can be pretty easy for you to cover many booths or meetings or whatever, however you're hosting it. And if you're a small team and you're just like, or maybe even a one-person operation, I would just say that even if you can just visit as many as you can, it can still make a big difference too. So another thing that can be helpful if you're able to do it is to have a help booth for job seekers. So many job seekers, especially students, are really nervous for the event. And I think it's easy to forget that. So, especially if you are a college or university, having a booth for them where they can ask last minute questions about their resume or how to talk to a recruiter can make them feel more prepared and have more confidence. And we've even seen some students that just come in and say, hi, and yeah, I'm so nervous and just want to check in before I go talk to people. So it can be really nice if you're able to have that. So if you're not a college or university, it can still be helpful. So job seekers can still get assistance, and it might be nice for them to get to talk to you and have that personal touch. But I wouldn't say it's quite as essential. And one thing to keep in mind as well is that not all teams are going to be big enough to support this. So especially if you're visiting different booths as well. So this is what I would recommend. So if your organization is a college or university, I highly recommend the help booth for your students, even if you have a small team. You can take turns running the booth if needed. If your organization, is small, just doing your best to just try to visit as many of the recruiters as well is fine. And if your organization is not a college or university, and you have a small team, I would say maybe don't worry about it quite as much. Maybe don't do it, and focus just on visiting as many of your recruiters as you can. All right. So let's talk about the data. So, the event's come and gone and you're ready to celebrate, you're done, right? No. Well, almost. I think that one thing, it might be tempting to just not really take a look at it, but I think that it's really important. So no matter which way you host your event, you will have some sort of data that you've collected. And the more you have, the better. So maybe if you have like majors or position types that job seekers are looking for, even better. So I would say that really, it's not, I would say you really want to look for like trends and whatnot. The more things you can find in that data, the more it'll help you learn about your job seekers, your recruiters, and how you can better serve them. So, one university, a surprising number of IT students attended one of their events, and it's not like they were a big IT school. So, what was interesting about this discovery was that they might want to look into trying to make more connections and better serve those students. So, the other thing is feedback. Definitely ask for feedback, no matter how you're doing your event. Ask both the job seekers and the recruiters. Did they like the event? How do they feel about it? How could it be improved? For the job seekers, did they like the employers that attended? Could they find something that was a good fit for them? If they didn't show up, why? Why didn't you show up? On the recruiter side of things, were job seekers well prepared? Were they satisfied with the turnout? The more feedback you get, the easier it is to make improvements for the future. All right, so why don't job seekers show up? So this is like the big golden question that I think a lot of people ask because you work hard to put the event together, and it's frustrating. It doesn't necessarily make sense. Um, you're looking at the data. You might wonder why didn't X number of job seekers show up. So let's talk a little bit about this. And I would say kind of like what we covered before. It is fairly common. If you look at like the average across a bunch of different events, it's fairly common to see 25 to 40% of registered job seekers actually attend. But I want to say that there are a few things to keep in mind. So the first is that many organizations don't capture registrations for in-person events, although some definitely do. But for those that don't, when they host an in-person event, it might seem like everyone that wanted to come came, but it might not be apparent that had registrations been collected, that there would have been more job seekers that would have registered and still not attended. But let's focus more importantly, why don't they attend? So, this goes back to what we discussed before. There are many variables. So you can't really explain every single case and situation. There are job seekers who forget, they end up having a conflict. But the biggest reason that we get that they tell us is that, again, it was that there was nothing for me. And it is an answer that can be really frustrating. So the best thing that you can do is to do your best to make sure that there's something for as many of the job seekers as possible and to market the event to job seekers that the event is a good fit for. But even then, there will always be job seekers that register, and there might not be something for them. And it doesn't mean that it's your fault. There could be someone that registers and the event is just really not a good fit for them. If your event is an all majors event and a student is majoring in astrophysics, there might be nothing for them. It might be hard to have something for them. So, what are you going to do in that case? However, there is another category of job seekers that you can do something about, and I don't think they're well known, and that's why I really want to bring your attention to them. And these are the ones that think there's nothing for them, but there is something for them. So, believe it or not, there are a decent number of job seekers that don't thoroughly look at the employers that or recruiters that are attending. So, for example, you might have an IT student or job seeker that might see a marketing company and ignore it because they didn't realize that the marketing company has IT positions available. So the more that you can inform and educate those job seekers about the opportunities available, the more likely they're going to be to attend. So, like we talked about earlier, you can send out email blasts detailing the types of open positions available. You can have a webinar for them going over all the different, employers or recruiters that are going to be attending. You can invite them to office hours, give them, personalized attention and finding something for them. So, don't be fooled. There are a decent number of job seekers that will try to make you think that they did their homework, but they didn't. All right. So, thank you so much for, taking the time to listen to my presentation. I really hope that it was helpful and beneficial for you in planning your future events. And if anyone's any questions or anything at any point, you're welcome to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you and whatnot. So I think that's all I've got for today. So I guess I'll turn it back over to the board.
Well, if you're open for some questions, maybe we do have some minutes available. So if you do have a question for Michael, I would say let's put it in the chat and hopefully I can quickly monitor the chat box. And if someone can assist me with that, let's see.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do some Q&A.
All right. So Nikki Cook says that this has been very helpful and they're having a virtual job fair in May 20th. she's grateful for the tips. Do you have any questions, Nikki, that you may want to share? And it's great to see you. Nikki Cook is
Hi,
a former,
everybody.
she's a former CPA board member as well. Woohoo!
Maybe I'll be back soon. You never know.
I like that. I like
um,
that.
Michael, thank you so much because I was like wondering how this would all work because, of course, this is our first time doing it. Unfortunately, last year we had to cancel altogether, so we didn't even have a career fair.
Right.
So we're going to be doing it through Job Speaker, which we've purchased. So we are just getting all of our employers uploaded into the system. So we're going to be using Zoom. So I like the tips of the virtual office hours for the employers because they do have a lot of questions. So
They do. They really do.
that tip is very helpful. So I'm definitely going to use that. And I've been taking notes the whole time. So I just want to say thank you because I am a one-man show there, and we have about, I think, about 7,000 students. Normally, to our in-person career fairs, we get a turnout of about 250, 300 students and about 50, 60 employers. I did send out like a save the date, and I've had a lot of employer responses already. So fingers crossed it all goes well. But yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Is there any other questions that we have? Let's see. We have something from Elizabeth. Do you have a favorite virtual platform, Michael? Is Zoom the best one? It seems to be a bit more user. And hold on, I guess I should open up the entire chat box. It seems to be a bit more user friendly than others. So if you can share what the advantages with Zoom or in utilizing a different platform as well, such as Jobs Connect, that'd be great to hear.
Yeah, sure. So I would definitely say that Zoom is a really good one. There might be a couple others that might be, good as well, like Teams or something. I think that kind of like what you mentioned, it's pretty user friendly. It has a lot of great features. You can probably collect the registrations and things just directly from there. A couple other cool things is you've got like the waiting room, you've got the breakout room. So a lot of great things there. But at the same time, I still wanted to point people's attention to other things out there in case they already have something else they like. There's no reason they couldn't use that. But if you didn't have one that was, you're really in love with, I would say probably Zoom's a really good one, or maybe Teams.
Outstanding. Thank you. Um, there's another question that came up from Denise Crawford. She's asking, do you think virtual fairs will continue after we are back to, and I quote, normal, whatever that new normal may be? Or will we continue to do maybe a hybrid um, or more virtual? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Question,
So I have a
rather.
lot of thoughts on that actually. So the first thing I'd say is that, of course, as of right now, this is going to be like the peak virtual events period because a lot of people, it's their only way to do something. I will say that I think that once we get a little bit more back to normal, um, it's going to be a little bit mixed. So I think on one hand, you'll still see that compared to before COVID, there will be more virtual events. But at the same time, it might not be at the same levels that it's at right now. So what we've been getting feedback and seeing is that there are a surprising number of organizations that are saying things like, "Oh my gosh, I would never have tried a virtual event before, and now that I'm doing it, I really like it. It's really helpful." So I think that people are going to start seeing more of the benefits of them and continue to do them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be exactly at this level, at least right away. I think a lot of people are going to be excited to do the in person again. Some people are jumping to do the in person. And I think there's another other couple of things too as well. So one thing that's sort of interesting that we've sort of been seeing in terms of preference for people that are hosting these types of events is that it does seem like it's a little bit of like a generational thing as well. So certain folks that are more experienced and have been in the industry for a longer time, what we've been seeing is for some of them, they actually prefer to do the in person and they would rather try to host their events in person no matter what, even if they acknowledge that there's certain benefits. Meanwhile, some other folks that are maybe like newer in the industry, maybe like your Gen Z or millennials and things like that, they might be more excited to try to do the online, the virtual, because that's sort of how they were raised. That's what they were used to. So it's a little bit of those both of those things, I think.
Wonderful. Great tips. Thank you for that. Great question, by the way, Denise, as well as the others. We have another question from Autumn Guardia, and she's asking, do you recommend breakout rooms for online job fairs? And I guess to piggyback off of that, if so, um, in what ways and how do you recommend that?
Okay, great question. So I would say that they are great. They're a great feature, but it's not something that I would force. So here's the thing: is that um, let's start with the benefit of the breakout room. So the breakout room is a great opportunity for recruiters to pull someone aside for a one-on-one conversation. I think that would be their main benefit. The only caveat there is that you have to know how to use them. So the only thing is that, especially if you know that your target audience isn't quite as tech savvy, things like that, in order for them to get the full advantage to feel comfortable, you might want to give them a little bit of a tutorial of how to use them. They're not very complicated to use, but they can be a little overwhelming if you've never tried it before. You don't want to be figuring it out in the middle of an event. So I would say that if you would like to offer them, and you're the hosting organization, maybe if you can just do like a little walkthrough for them. But they can absolutely be very helpful.
Perfect. Thank you. We have another question from Sarah Chavez. Thank you for posting your question, Sarah. It says, what are your tips to ensure that every Zoom event is different, especially since students are zoomed out or tired of Zoom events and classes, right? I think we're kind of like on a Zoom, 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 boom, out. Great
Yeah,
question, Sarah.
absolutely. Great question. So in terms of the Zoom fatigue, it's a tough one. I think that, people miss seeing each other in person. So, but at the same time, I would say that, um, you know, making things a lot with the gamification, things like that, that's a tricky one because I think on one hand, if you make things more fun and exciting, you might be pulling more job seeker students, whatever, to the event. But you might want to just be careful about making it too much about the games and things like that, and not as much about, um, you know, the actual job search and things like that. So a little bit of a balance.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. So we have a question, and this always comes up, and this is it's coming from Greg Friedman. He says, "Well, we have access to your PowerPoint to review later on and follow up with you. So, do we? Do we? Do we, Michael? Will we? And then, if so, if the answer is if so, of course, maybe I'm just doing an inference here. If you can do a maybe email it to us, and then we will go ahead and post it on our website to make it available so that they can view your PowerPoint and then contact you directly for more information."
Yeah, absolutely. I'll see if I can get that PowerPoint over to you.
Okay, great. So thank you for that question, Greg. And just so that all the other members know, for other presentations, we will have the PowerPoints available for those presentations as well. Now we have another question from Margaret Fernandez, and she's asking, do you have tips for keeping students engaged while on Zoom? Have you tried any games like Kahoot? So I guess it's a springboard off of the previous question.
Yeah, great continuation. So I haven't actually tried or seen people do necessarily Kahoot. Um, I definitely know for a fact that for similar types of virtual events, people have tried some things like that. So it's hard to say necessarily, at least in the context of a virtual job fair, what the best approach would be with that. But it's definitely worth a shot to try doing it. I would just say again that just to be careful about making it too much about the games and the gamification, and not enough of the actual job search.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Okay. Um, let's see. I don't see any more questions, but I do want to encourage everyone here. Is there any other questions that you may have for Michael regarding um, the platform with Jobs Connect, Connected, I should say, or any other questions as it pertains to virtual career fairs or virtual events? All right. We have another question being popped up. What is a good number of employers to keep things manageable? What an excellent question.
Yeah, that is a good question. Well, I think it depends on a couple of factors. If you're doing it yourself or you're using a platform, and also how big your team is. Um, if you're a small team, it's your first time, you're hosting this completely by yourself. Um, you know, I would say maybe keep it to like 8 or 10, at least your first time. If you have a bigger team, or especially if you're using like an actual vendor or something like JobSpeaker or something like that, there's no harm in trying to get to like 30, 50, things like that. Um, you know, the online virtual platforms and stuff like that it can be really good to have a lot of different options. So I would just say it's a little bit about that size of what you think you can manage.
Wonderful, thank you. And I did want to share out that Jackie Kennedy was saying Kahoot is good to create questions with learners' answers, which is good. But as you said, keep it manageable. We also had another comment here from Melina, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Melina Rodriguez, and it says, "Does Job Connects or Jobs Connected work with Zoom or is it browser based?" Great question, Melina.
Oh, that's a great question. So you're talking about Jobs Connected. So we
Yes.
actually, it actually does work with Zoom. So that is, yeah.
Wonderful. Now we have another question. This one's coming from Victoria, and Victoria, I apologize if I scramble eggs the last name because sometimes I do that, but I apologize. Victoria Cam Camers Camerzel. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. If not, please unmute yourself and correct me. And she's asking, this is in regards to virtual events. What platform would you recommend for a wedding? I like that. Great question. And
It's funny.
congratulations, Victoria, if you're going to be getting married soon.
Congratulations. That's a great question. So unfortunately, I think you kind of stumped me on this one. That's a tough one. I can't say off the top of my head that I have the perfect solution for you. Um, but there are a lot of different options out there. Um, I guess it might depend a little bit about if you wanted to do something yourself, if you did your own Zoom or something like that. But there might potentially be some different platforms you could look into as well. Just so you know, a lot of times with like the platform type of way to do it, they're usually sort of conducive to having like booths and things like that. If you didn't feel like you needed something like that, you could very well just have like a big Zoom webinar or something like that.
Perfect. Thank you.